there had been an advert in the British Medical Journal for something called the Sick Doctors Trust. Now, this advert had been in the kind of classified part at the back of the journal probably over I'd been noticed it for 3 or 4 years. So during my drinking, I'd noticed it. My eyes were drawn to it. And it was a charity which supported doctors and dentists and medical students with alcohol and other drug problems. So this time I phoned that number. I was in crisis again because of my using. And the doctor that answered the phone was a doctor in recovery. I'd never met someone else in recovery that wasn't a patient before. And he told me, instead of telling me what to do, he told me his story. His story connected with me in a way that the tablets hadn't. It did something for me in that moment that my previous couple of years of treatment from the medical clinic, which I'm grateful for, and it did make a difference. I don't want to give the impression that I'm not grateful for it. I am. There were kind people that were kind to me. But the thing that made the most difference in that short 20-minute conversation with the doctor on the phone was him telling me his story and me getting something I hadn't had for such a long time, which was hope. I was also introduced to something I hadn't been aware of before, which was recovery as an identity. So he talked about himself as in recovery. I didn't know that term until that point, in recovery. So the treatment I'd had at the outpatient clinic was not really focused on recovery in the sense of recovery as an identity, recovery as a concept, recovery as a journey. And that intrigued me. However, he was clear, given what I told him where I was with my using. He said, you need to be in treatment. And I said, I'm in treatment, talking about the outpatients. He just laughed. He said, no, I'm talking about residential treatment. You need something that's a lot more intensive. And 3 days later, I found myself in residential rehab. I didn't even know what I was going to. I honestly did not know what I was going to. It was much harder than I realized it was going to be. And I thought I was going for 4 weeks. And after 4 weeks, they said, you need longer. And I thought, I don't want to stay longer. It's too hard. I don't like the messages I'm hearing. At least I don't like some of them.
What do you mean by too hard, David? What were your thoughts during that?
I was having to talk about my feelings, and I wasn't connected to my feelings. I wasn't familiar with talking about my feelings. I certainly wasn't familiar with talking about what was going on for me in front of other people. It's intensely secretive, and shame was driving that. I was too ashamed to talk about it. I thought it was about privacy, but in fact, it was about shame. I was disconnected. So disconnected from myself, first of all, but certainly disconnected from other human beings. So the process of reconnecting turned out to be quite a challenging one. And then I was starting to look at myself in ways that were uncomfortable, because some of the stuff which was fueling the shame, needed to be expressed and started to see in a different light instead of a condemnation attached to it, a more an honest look at it, but also a more compassionate response to, vulnerability rather than being a bad person. I was living in a sort of way that I felt was morally not acceptable, and just condemning myself for it rather than saying, actually, you were quite vulnerable, and yeah, that these things are not very palatable, but there's a reason, and you can get well from this. Anyway, they said after 4 weeks you need to stay longer. I thought, I don't want to, but I need to. So I'll stay reluctantly. And then I got to 6 weeks, and they say, you actually need longer term. And by 6 weeks, I was thinking, okay, I'll just go with it, because nothing else had worked that I'd tried before. I mean, had tried for the previous 2 years really hard. There was a part of me wanted it and a part of me didn't, and there was a battle going on between these two parts. However, where I was at that moment,
positive was happening. Did you feel something was changing?
Yeah, I did. But by the time I got to 6 weeks, I could begin to see a glimmer of light. I mean, the main thing that was keeping me going was hope. The people that were, many of the staff in the residential rehab were actually in recovery and talked about, again, this thing of recovery as an identity and recovery as a community. You know, a community of recovering people. I was introduced to mutual aid at this point through standard mutual aid groups, but also through a group called the British Doctors and Dentists Group, which is a group which supports doctors, dentists, and medical students who have got addictions. So that little group of there was a group in Edinburgh, and there was a group in Glasgow, and I started to go to both of these groups. And the first meeting I went to at that group, I heard my own story. Another doctor had almost exactly the same story as me, shared it with the rest of the group members, and I'm just feeling emotional as I'm talking about it just now. It really, really touched me in a way that was profound, in a way that medication couldn't, in a way that clinic appointments couldn't. I listened to someone else with a similar experience, and I connected with it in a hugely profound way that changed the way that I felt about myself. And I was able to let go some of that shame, that professional shame. Doctors, in my head, there was an unwritten rule that said doctors should not become alcohol dependent or drug dependent. And doctors shouldn't behave in the ways that I'd behaved. And I was just condemning myself for it rather than actually dealing with, if I'd been my own patient, you know, I'd have been dealing with it in a different way, but I was giving myself an incredibly hard time. So that connection to mutual aid and to the British Doctors and Dentists Group, those were profoundly influential experiences for me. And I sometimes wonder if that happened when I first went for help. You know, would I had a shorter trajectory into recovery? I don't know. And your journey is your journey. Just, you know, no point in raking over it. But I do think, gosh, if they had put recovery at the center of that experience at the very beginning, what would have been different? Anyway, after 6 weeks, they said you need to stay longer, and then it got to about just over 4 months, and they said, we think you're ready to leave now. And I said, are you sure? Because by that time, I was experiencing quite profound changes, not almost epiphanies, really, in the sense of the penny dropping and things beginning to fit into place, self-awareness increasing, letting go of the shame, understanding the nature of addiction in a way that I hadn't before. And just this continual infusion of hope by hearing other people's stories and understanding next steps, and always having people just a little bit ahead of you on the journey who were acting as supports, but also guides and role models. It all made such perfect sense.